Hi, everybody. So this is a new Pear Deck, but same thing. I'm going to do videos daily going over the answers to the items that we did in each day's Pear Deck. So this is for Thursday, February 11th, and this is American Slavery and Overview Part 2. So starting out, we really want to focus on the IQ. How did the institution of slavery violate the promises of the revolution? Because this is the historical question we're asking is, sorry about that, my phone rang. Let me go ahead and pause the video and I'll come back to it. All right, I'm back. So, American slavery and overview. So, the question we're asking ourselves is how did the institution of slavery violate the promises of the revolution? And the reason why we're asking this question is we have to look at what were those promises of the revolution, these founding documents for the country, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and Bill of Rights. Martin Luther King, actually right before his death, gave a speech now known as his mountaintop speech, where he talks about how it would be different. We wouldn't be complete, says he wouldn't be complaining as much if this were a different country, a country that was started with the idea of a totalitarian regime, is the words he uses, a government and where they told people you're not going to have any rights. But he said this country was started with the founders saying, no, we want people to have rights. We want everyone to have life, liberty, happiness, equality, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, right to bear arms, all these things. So those are the promises we laid out as the foundation. We have to constantly, as residents in this country, say, okay, how are we living up to those promises? And make sure that we are doing that, right? Make sure that we are making sure there's right to a fair trial, democracy, all those wonderful things, those wonderful qualities. So moving on, what is it that you're doing today? You're going to be doing claim, evidence, and support. You're not actually going to do this today. This isn't going to be till a future slide, but just wanted to make that clear. Remember, you can pause the video at any point in getting what you need. On this slide, all I did was made sure you understand these notes on language, specifically that this word right here is going to be used in primary sources, but you should not use it in your writing unless you put in quotation marks to denote its use in primary sources. And we're going to try to use the word enslaved person when possible to make sure we are prioritizing the enslaved people as humans. Moving on. In the previous lesson, we learned about transatlantic slave trade, cotton and its relationship to slavery, the Second Middle Passage. In this lesson, specifically today, it's going to focus on white supremacy and the myth of racial inferiority. In future lessons, you will learn about the enforcement of slavery and the fugitive slave law. So the stuff is tough. It's not, it's going to make you sad. It's going to make you furious, all those things. So slide 6, this is a reminder of what source we are using for a lot of our secondary source information. Here it is. Go ahead and drag those numbers if you haven't done that yet. And then slide 7, I asked you to read this excerpt from the article and answer the question, how is American slavery different? And after reading it, we realized American slavery is different than slavery in other parts of the world in 3 very important ways. 1, it's permanent. People can't just, they aren't enslaved for a specific period of time. It's for life, okay? 2, it's hereditary, meaning it's passed down through the mother, specifically in the US. And then 3, it's tied to race. Okay, so slavery in the US was tied to the race of the individual. Okay, moving on to the next slide, we started learning about this concept of white supremacy, in which people who supported slavery tried to spread a lie that there was inferior races, that some races were inferior and some were superior, meaning better. So again, this is a lie they were trying to spread. Supporters of slavery, tried to use science and religion to back them up. And they started to say things like, okay, if they started to say things like, oh, white people are this way, black people are that way. And again, to spread these lies of white racial superiority, which we know is not true. There is not such a thing as you being better just because you're white. But this was the lie that was trying to be spread and was successful in spreading because it led to the enslavement of 4 million people before the Civil War. Slide 9, we're going to read a primary source written by one of those people who was spreading this lie. He was the governor of Mississippi. His name was William McWillie, and he wrote this speech in 1857, which I'm not going to read right here. But if you read the speech and then you go to answer the question, after reading the speech, how did he justify slavery? You will learn that he tried to claim that it was, quote, good for African Americans, that they, quote, needed it. So he is spreading this lie in this speech, trying to claim that slavery would help people. Obviously, we know that's not true. Obviously, we know now, right? But in looking at that source, we can see how someone spread this myth of racial inferiority. Someone in power, right? He wasn't just a random person, he was the governor of the state, and how that might lead others to believe him. Starting next week, we're going to be looking at the conditions of slavery, but then also starting to really remember the biggest crime of white supremacy is slavery. And one of the consequences of that is refusing to acknowledge the humanity and the excellence of Black Americans. After this investigation is over, when we finish learning about the conditions of slavery, we're going to get deep into what it means when we say resistance and how all these amazing stories of people resisting slavery and enslavement. All right, everyone, again, pause the video at any point that you needed it, and let me know if you have any questions at all.